Spring is in the air at Global Voice Broadcasting. Fresh new shows are hitting the airwaves every day. Shows about all the things that matter to you in your life. Music, fashion, celebs, and more. It's all here, and it's getting better every day. Only at Global Voice Broadcasting.
But you know the bass clef really well. That's your you're a copyist. We'll talk about that. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to another fantastic episode. I'm predicting that it's going to be a fantastic episode because it will be, of All Over Voiceover with Kip VH. I'm your host, Kip VH, and with me in studio today, my good friend and fellow voice actor, the lovely, the talented Mr. Bob Joles. Bob, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me here today. It's lovely.
I'm glad that you find it lovely as well.
It is lovely. It's a gloomy day outside. It's lovely to see you in your burnt orange shirt.
Yes, thank you. I wanted to wear burnt orange. It reminds me
of umber?
I was out of umber. A nice amber. I want to put gels in my house, on the lights in my house, just to sort of, we had gotten
stage lighting is best.
I think stage lighting is awesome. Bob, we've known each other for about
since you came to town.
Yeah, about 5 years. Yeah, almost exactly. Yeah. Awesome. How long have you been in town?
Let's see. I grew up here.
Did you really?
I grew up in Southern California. I was born in Glendora, which is out at the far end of the San Gabriel Valley, heading toward, if you go past Azusa, it's the next town.
Okay.
If you know where Azusa is. If you don't, come back a little further and we'll get with Monrovia and Duarte. If you don't know where they are, Arcadia, Pasadena.
Okay.
Just look at the 210 freeway and go along the foothill mountains there.
It's kind of connect the dots along the foothills.
Yeah, there you go. I grew up out here, fourth generation Californian.
Really?
And, gosh, I went to Cal State Long Beach. I worked at Disneyland for a while, subbing in bands and playing in parades.
Yeah.
And the summer of 1982, they were getting ready for the big opening of Epcot Center.
Oh, yeah.
And I was subbing in the Disneyland band for one of the tuba players. And I found out Disney was looking for a brass quintet to play in the Canada Pavilion at Epcot.
Oh.
So I called 4 of my friends at school. I wasn't the first 4. I mean, it took a little time to get everybody, but
sure.
I got guys together and we started rehearsing and memorizing some music and auditioned for Disney. And it actually was 3 different auditions until I found the right group that clicked and they liked. And at the end of the audition, Sonny Anderson, who used to be in charge of all the talent booking for both coasts, we finished with our routine, and he said, "That was great, guys. What do you think about moving to Orlando?"
Wow.
And we said, "That's why we're here." And 10 days later, we had a rental truck and all of our belongings. Now, mind you, 5 college guys. Some of us have graduated, some have not, but college guys not really out in the real world quite yet.
Right.
Get a 17-foot, U-Haul, and I think we filled a third of it with all of our worldly possessions. What we didn't carry in our cars, which was basically our instruments and change of clothes.
Yeah.
Everything else was in that that rental van.
There's something so insane about being that young and putting everything in there and realizing either how little stuff you have or that sense of there is a moment where you go, everything I own is behind me inside these tiny walls and I'm going to go drive across country.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's that exuberance of youth.
Yeah.
And we had, you want to have a job playing somewhere, but most of us were training to be teachers. But, here we have a chance to go someplace. We have a guaranteed job for at least a year.
At least a year.
And more than likely, they're just going to keep us on. And we moved across country and, 5 days a week, 6, sometimes 7 sets a day, sometimes doing gigs late night at the park that would add to overtime and what we got paid.
Sure.
But it was a great gig. We all bought houses.
Wow.
After, being established there for a while, new cars. I mean, I remember when we got the gig and our first trumpet player said, "I can afford wheat bread now." And so, I mean, it was great. And I played outdoors for 5 years. I did a lot of arranging work for the group while we were out there. And after those 5 years, there was a position that opened up in the music library at Disney World for a music copyist. And in the old days, a music copyist would take manuscript paper or onion skin paper that had staff lines drawn on it.
Okay.
And we would write out by hand with ink and a straight edge the parts for musicians for their, the charts that they would, that would come into us to copy for them.
So if you, all right, just because that particular world is something that I've got about this much, I'm showing a very tiny,
very small
fingers. When you say copyist, what's the difference? A composer creates
a composer will come up with the tune with the chords that go around it.
I see.
An orchestrator or an arranger, they're two different jobs, but they're almost the same. So I can kind of lump them together. They will take, say, it's just a piano sketch. So you have a melody line and you have a basic chord structure, and the chords that go with that. And then the arranger or the orchestrator will take that tune and flesh it out. If it's for television or movies, you're dealing with a full orchestra, or depending on what the composer has in mind. I mean, they can set whatever size group that they want. For the groups at Disney World, I mean, there was one group called Bon Voyage. It was 8 trombones, 2 tubas, and 3 drummers. There was the Sax Quintet. They play at Disneyland. There's another one that plays at Walt Disney World.
Okay.
The Disneyland and Disney World Band are basically the same ensembles. The 5 woodwind players, 4 trumpets, 4 trombones, 2 tubas, and they would play their stuff during the day. So the charts for all kinds of stuff. We were a brass quintet. Yeah. There was a mariachi band, but they took care of their own stuff because nobody understood them. But no, I mean, people understood them, but I mean, they had their own charts.
Yeah.
But, we would just, sling ink all day, when I was working in the library. And, there was also a library where all the tunes for every group that had ever performed there, their stuff was stored in this library. So if they brought a group back, or if somebody was missing and they needed to pull parts out to make, copies of, so they would have a folder that they could read off of. Normally all the groups have everything memorized.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's a whole other thing. But, we would draw the little black dots. It's all done on computer now. And I did that for 3 years at Disney World.
Were you performing while you were doing that as well?
No, I still would practice.
Okay.
But I wasn't really performing. I would sub occasionally here and there and pick up the odd job.
Yeah.
And after that, and I did a little bit of arranging work too during that time, but then lost that job through a series of events that I don't need to go into.
Sure.
If you buy me a drink some night, I'll tell you all about it. It's really fun. Yeah, that's it. Was out of work for about 6 months.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, during that time that I took some odd jobs here and there and, filling places. My first wife was, performing and doing her thing and, keeping us afloat for the most part.
Yeah.
And then Universal was getting ready to open in June of 1990.
Okay.
And so a friend of mine who I had met when I was working at Walt Disney World when I first got there, Ron Schneider, who performed as the Dreamfinder. All you Disney files will know who I'm talking about.
Is that associated with the Imagination Figment and all that?
Yes, exactly.
Yes. Awesome.
They had walk-around Dreamfinders, and Ron Schneider was the very first Dreamfinder that they hired. And he had a little puppet that he carried around, and Figment would whisper in his ear, and he would tell the people what Figment was talking about. And and Ron did a great job at that.
Yeah.
He left the company, went off and did some writing some places, and then he wound up at Universal. And he had heard that I was out of work and looking for a job, and he called me and asked me if I would like to be the walk around W.C. Fields. I've done Fields' voice, but I didn't know a lot about the man himself. And mind you, kids, this is before the internet.
That's right.
We would have to go to the public library and check out books. Go to the encyclopedia. Anyway, So I said, sure. So he sent me over this script for W.C. Fields' tour of Hollywood Boulevard.
Oh, man.
That, I would conduct a couple of times a day. And it was all mostly made up BS like Fields would do anyway.
Right.
And it was incredibly, clever and funny. So I went in and I did the voice for Ron and for Danny Burzlaff, who was in charge of that area of the entertainment group. And they hired me. But the thing was, they had a guy who was in place who they were looking to replace,
yeah,
due to some problems that I don't need to go into. Sure. I mean, I don't need to disparage that poor man. I think he's a hobo now. I'm not sure.
But hey,
anyway,
it's a good term.
After they had the opening week ceremonies, he was shown the door, and I was shown the indoor. He was shown the outdoor, and I started learning how to be W.C. Fields. And eventually the rubber noses that they were buying, I think they were the Wuchi rubber noses that looked, they were quote unquote, Mr. Field noses.
Right.
No S and no WC on
Right,
it.
exactly. So they couldn't get sued by the estate.
Exactly. But there was this huge bulbous thing that, if you pushed on it, it would collapse into the back of your brain.
Right.
They looked horrible, and I didn't really understand stage makeup and how to blend it in and all that stuff.
Yeah.
V. Neal, the makeup artist, had opened a makeup store in Orlando, and V took a casting of my upper face from my upper lip to just above my eyebrows, and then had a guy sculpt a W.C. Fields nose for me, and then I would get my prosthetic noses from this guy from his shop. Fantastic. And I would buy my makeup at V's place. I still know V.
Oh, that's so awesome.
Lovely lady.
Oh, she seems like it. We're such huge fans of Face Off and of course her work.
Yeah, well, I mean, what you see is what you get. I mean, when I first got to know her, she had won for Dick Tracy. She had won for Hoffa and for Edward Scissorhands. So, I mean, 3-time Academy Award winner helping me put on a W.C. Fields nose. But I learned a great deal about prosthetics, from that. And by doing that, when I first started, I would come in, my shift would be from, say, 10 to 6. Mm-hmm. I would come in at 7:30 or 8 and start putting on my nose. It would literally take me over 2 hours to get it all done because I was so new at doing this stuff.
Sure.
By the end of the 3 years that I worked at Universal doing W.C. Fields, I could come in, put on my nose, and get dressed in about 25 minutes. So practice does make perfect.
Practice does. And it's really interesting to me, having done a fair amount of theme park work now too, the amount of independence that you have when you're working in that, especially in terms of makeup. Like when I was doing a Scarecrow, they were like, all right, so here's the makeup palette. I'm like,
go for it.
Doesn't someone do this for me? No, you're on your own. Good luck.
Yeah, good for you.
Good for you. We have to have a conversation about your eyes. Well, what's wrong? I thought you kissed.
I thought you really liked the way they were so bloodshot.
But it's fascinating too. I'm curious how much your performance must have changed when you got a nose that felt more appropriate.
It did change a lot. It was a wonderful job when I finally got into the groove of it.
Yeah.
And, learning more and more about Fields, because people will come up to you, as you know, in theme parks, and they will tell you things that you should know, or they know, and this is lore. And there was a man who came up to me one day when I was in my Fields garb on the Hollywood Boulevard part of the park.
Yeah.
And he had this little black book, and he pulled it out, and he looks in it, and he goes, "What's on your tombstone?" And knowing full well that Fields is interred his ashes are interred in a Glendale Forest lawn, and there's just a little plaque that says W.C. Fields, and it says 1880 to 1946. That's all it says. And I said, why don't you tell me? And he says, "All things being equal, I'd rather be in Philadelphia." And I said, yes, from that wonderful Vanity Fair article. And I had the date at that time. Vanity Fair had asked stars of the day in about 1926, 27, somewhere in there, what would you want on your tombstone? And Field said, all things being equal, I'd rather be in Philadelphia. And they had these little cards that looked like tombstones that were all over pages of the magazine with, different people saying what they would like to be remembered by.
Yeah.
And this guy, that's what it is. You have to remember that. And I said, I give it some thought. But it was great. Kids will run up to you and they'll, shove an autograph book in your face. I say, go away, you little nose miner. I want nothing to do with you. Now your mother, on the other hand. I mean, it was one I could flirt all day long.
Yeah.
Be evil to children, smack them on the head with my cane if I felt so inclined, and I did occasionally.
Right.
And the best part of it was they would buy me a box of cigars once a month, and I could smoke cigars on set.
Oh, my God.
It was...
and it's fascinating, the differences between Disney and Universal and that freedom of what Universal is, that it's still wholesome and everything, but they're still trying to scare the hell out of you.
Oh, yeah. Well, the horror nights, that was...
Oh, man.
Of course, probably one of the most horrific nights I had. Well, no, I'm not going to say that. It'll get out. Never mind. We'll go past that one. But one of the best stories, though, that I have was shortly after opening, it was maybe a month or two, I was walking up past, they had an area, the Boneyard, where they had old props, big props.
Yeah.
And people could come by and look at things all over there. And I was walking toward the main gate, and coming down from the main gate, I see three people. And there's a lovely lady in the middle, and these two men on either side. And it's Steven Spielberg and Kate Capshaw and George Lucas.
Oh, my gosh.
And I don't want to draw attention to them because there's a person that's doing a VIP tour with them. And, but they're just kind of on their own, but they're off to the side a little bit. So as I'm walking past, I tip my typical W.C. Fields top hat. I say, good day, George, Stephen, dear lady. And as I'm walking away, George and Steve, I can call him Steve.
You can call him Steve. Well, you
Steve and George,
That's right.
We're close. About as far away as from his house to where we are now.
Right.
Mr. Spielberg and Mr. Lucas were both laughing. And Kate Capshaw, I hear say, who is that? Was that Wallace Berry? I was shocked that she knew who Wallace Berry was.
That's pretty good reference level.
And I would have people come up to me all the time and say, are you Wallace Berry? Tourists from Brazil would say, Il Pinguino, Il Pinguino. Because the Batman was very big at that time.
That's really wild. And it's one of the things that I do really appreciate about anytime you go to Universal too, that they do a great job of keeping the legendary characters alive. And you have the opportunity.
They used to.
There's still now, because of Universal, Ilsa knows who Lucy is.
Yeah, the real Laurel and Hardy, I think, still occasionally do things.
Yeah,
I'm not sure about the Marx Brothers anymore.
Right,
and Fields they phased out.
Yeah,
after I left in 1993 and came back here, they started phasing out a lot of the older characters,
becoming more costumey, more Woody Woodpecker, more Scooby-Doo kind of stuff.
They still have those, but they were getting rid of the face. Lookalikes. They were getting rid of Marilyn Monroe. They kept the Lucy around for a long time. They had a guy who looked a lot like Desi, and he and Lucy would do stuff together.
Yeah,
they had wonderful. We had some terrific Marilyn Monroes.
Wow.
But it was an interesting job. But things were changing in my life. In 1993, my first marriage fell apart. And I just wanted to get the heck out of there.
Yep.
So I had worked at Disney. I had worked at Universal. Kind of didn't have anywhere else to go.
All that was left was Cape Canaveral, really.
Yeah, and I didn't have my engineering degree. And I wasn't really the, let's say, body type of an astronaut. So I packed up my stuff and I went back to California. And I started, because of the voiceover agent that I had in Orlando and working there for 3-4 years, learning the ropes in a right-to-work state where I didn't have to be a member of SAG and AFTRA.
Yeah.
It was a great training ground. And there was a guy, Bob Barnes, who took me under his wing as a voice talent and really showed me a lot of stuff. And I started working quite a bit. D. Bradley Baker was there at the same time.
No kidding.
Dee and I worked together quite a bit.
That's great.
Yeah, and we had, we did a few projects together while we were there.
What was the nature of the work that was down there during that time?
Most of it was radio and TV ads.
Radio and TV commercials.
I did a lot of stuff for the Orlando Sentinel. I was one of their go-to guys for character voice stuff that they would do.
Great.
And they had great in-house, copywriters that would, they did everything in-house. They didn't have an outside agency at that time.
Did you do park voices when you were down there as well, or not so much, more performance stuff?
At that time, it was being the guy who was on the street either with a tuba in my arms or a rubber nose on my face.
That's great.
But then when I came, my agent in Orlando had a connection to Don Pitts, who was one of the original torchbearers, if you will, of voiceover. He worked for Charlie Stern. And Charlie Stern was the first voiceover agent in Los Angeles. He was the guy who had Mel Blanc and Dawes Butler and Paul Frees and June Foray and Stan Freberg, Bill Scott. I mean, you name Orson Welles. I mean, you name them, Charlie Stern had them. He had all the big voiceover cartoon people.
Wow.
And then when Charlie, when Charlie retired, he passed everything on to Don. And Don merged with, at the time, JHR, Joseph Helfond and Ricks, which then became KSA, which was Kazarian Spencer and Associates, which is merged into KMR now. But anyway, so I mean, but it was always Don Pitt's voices, part of KSA or JHR when I was there. And my first meeting with Don, I came in, and it was shortly before I left Universal. I was already planning to come out here anyway. And then there was some other stuff that went on. But anyway, so I go to Don's office, which was JHR's offices were on the corner of Hollywood and Highland. There's a different structure there now.
Yes.
But there was a big office building there at the time, and I was up on the 4th floor to the JHR offices, and I waited. I was supposed to meet Don at 5 o'clock, and about 5:10, they said, you can go back. It's all the way straight back to the very end. So I walked through every division of JHR and went back to Don's office, and his assistant, Marla, showed me into the office. And Don's sitting there in this very nice, office. And he, sits me down, and we talk for about, 15, 20 minutes. And he's telling me stories about Paul Frees and Orson Welles. And I mean, it just, I'm hanging on every word.
Yeah.
And we talk a little bit about what I'd been doing. And he said, and I just figured we would chat. I'll hand him my cassette demo.
Right.
Kids, those are an old thing. Look it up on the internet.
That's right. That's the one with the 2 holes.
The 2 holes, not the one like the CD.
If it gets jammed, you use a pencil.
And I just hand him my demo reel and thank him, and he'd have my contact information, and he would call me if he was interested.
Right.
So after about 15, 20 minutes, he says, Bob, you have your demo? And I figure, okay, this is the end of the conversation. Right. It's right here. Okay, let's give it a listen. Okay, sure. So he walks around his desk behind me. There's this big cabinet, opens it up, and there's stereo equipment. You kids are, again, not familiar with this stuff. Look at an old movie from the 80s.
Right.
And so he opens it up and he fires up, all the preamps and everything. It was after tubes. These were transistors, kids. And he puts my cassette in and he pulls a chair up next to me and sits down, and he puts one arm across his chest and the other one's holding his chin, and he listens. There's not a aha, ho, laugh, nothing for now, again, this is really long, 2.5 minute.
That was a 2.5 minute demo.
2.5 minute demo, which was short by some people's standards.
Yes. And in that, were you doing like, here's my AVO, and here's my crazy character? Like it's a combination of everything, or?
There were straight characters that I would do.
Yeah.
And, just straight read stuff, but most of it was character read stuff.
Okay.
There were things that I had glommed from my, Orlando Sentinel things, and then some other voices that I did.
Yeah.
And for the 2.5 minutes, it went on, and I kept sweating and thinking, oh, my God, I'm not ready for the LA market. I can go back to Orlando, change my plans, stay for another year, really hone it, try again in a year and see if Don likes me better. And at the end of the tape, it stops, and Don goes, Well, Bob, that was really great. Wide variety of characters, good range, really funny stuff on there. When are you coming out to California? I'd like to represent you and sign you. You could have picked my job 4 floors down on Highland Avenue and just put it back in my chin.
Yeah.
Oh, my gosh. It was – I was stunned. And I said – and I told him when I was coming back in a couple of months. And he said, great, when you get back and settled, let us know. We'll sign you. And we did. But I – needed work to sustain myself.
Sure.
So I used my copying skills and I made some connections here and there, and I wound up working at Sony for a number of years, but I was a floater. Didn't really have a permanent – my most permanent home was at Paramount working for Bob Bornstein.
Wow.
And we worked on the Academy Awards every year. Which,
no kidding.
Oh, it was working
What
on –
a trip.
Oh, it was great. And one year I actually got to sit backstage because they had the orchestra on stage rather than in the pit. It was the year that Titanic won.
Okay.
And they needed 2 librarians. One was in the percussion box, which was above the orchestra, but there was a ladder that went up there and they had to pull it away for the show. So
you're just up.
My friend Emmett, who I did a lot of library work on movies with, Emmett was up in the box with the 3 percussionists, and I was off stage right, sitting on these risers they were going to use for something else later, just waiting in case somebody's stand gets knocked over. You've got 180 plus cues in the folders. If it falls over, there's a cue coming in a few seconds.
Yeah.
I would have to run out, get the next few cues in order, put it on their stand, and then get the rest of the book in order, and then put that back on the stand for them so they could keep going with the show. It's happened in the pit before. Emmett told me horror stories. But being on stage, it's even worse because everyone can see you.
Everyone can see you.
Because they could really see me if it had happened because the orchestra was in silver lame dresses and tuxedos, and I'm in a black tux. So, look at that little man running around down there picking up all those pieces of paper that fell.
Does that happen frequently?
It doesn't happen frequently, but every once in a while somebody will reach for, one of the doublers will reach for one of their instruments. Sax player will put his alto down and reach for his clarinet, and he'll bump the stand. And because there's so much music in it, it's very heavy, and boom, it goes over. Or a violin player reaches for something or bows too strongly, or they turn or whatever. It's happened. And it's just, it's a disaster waiting to happen, but it was very infrequent. But you have to have the insurance policy there.
Right.
A librarian sitting off to the side.
Right.
But, I started working as a librarian, and about a year later, in early '94, in March, they put out an audition for the voice of Sneezy for Disney on Ice. And I found out later it was the second round, and Don said, why don't you give this a shot? So I had 24 hours. I went down to his office, picked up a cassette of Billy Gilbert doing Sneezy, the original voice. And the lines were easy to do because I could get his voice real easy. It's a little more adenoidal than mine, but Billy's voice was pretty easy to do.
Adenoidal being more like...
I'd be sure to watch out for the...
And Billy had done a vaudeville act before he came to Hollywood, where he did people sneezing in different ways.
Oh,
wow! And Walt remembered that, and he had asked Billy to come in and be the voice of Sneezy when they were doing Snow White.
Fascinating.
So anyway, I had 24 hours to do this, and there were 7 different lines, and on each line was a different type of sneeze. And I figured, okay, I can do the voice. Let me concentrate on each of these sneezes.
Now, was it broken out in terms of the type of sneeze they wanted you to do on the tape, or was it just come up with it yourself?
No, you listen to what he's doing.
I see.
And I just figured I've got to imitate this as best I can.
Yes.
So that's what I concentrated on. I went into the booth, and Marla directed me the next day at Don Pitt's office. And we only did 1 pass on it. She said, that was terrific.
Wow.
Do you want to do it again? And I said, I can, but if you think it's okay. And she said, yeah, it pretty much sounded like the tape. I said, okay, then that's what I was going for.
Yeah.
And so, as you know, a week goes by, you don't hear anything, you figure, okay, somebody else got it. You just, and voiceover's great that way because you just forget about it.
Yeah.
And then 2 weeks had gone by, and 3 weeks. And during that third week, got the call that I was going to be working, doing the voice of Sneezy for this. And they sent me a script for the Snow White on Ice show, and there was a song we had to learn. And this is going to be fun. And then I saw the list of the guys I'm working with. So I'm looking at the thing, and it says, okay, Doc, Jim Cummings, Bashful, Jeff Glenn Bennett, Happy, Kevin Schoen, Grumpy, Corey Burton, Sleepy, Bill Farmer, Bob who? It was just like, oh my God, these guys are my heroes.
Yeah.
I mean, these guys are all working LA cartoon guys.
Yeah.
And and we did 2 days working on the ice show, and we had so much fun, and they were so welcoming to me.
Yeah.
And we had we joked about it. There was a mic that was over off to the side that wasn't connected to anything, and we kept referring to that as Dopey's mic.
That's great.
But Jeff Bennett, during the first afternoon, started saying some of his lines in the script and made them sound so filthy. We're doing it's the bedroom scene where Snow White has been woken up by the dwarves coming in, and he goes, and she's talked with them and then getting them ready for their meal, and he starts going, "Do we have to wash where it doesn't show? What are wicked wiles?" And then he said another one that I won't go on to. But we had such a ball, and those guys are still great friends of mine to this day. And that was my first introduction to voiceover in Los Angeles. But I still kept working as a copyist because it wasn't like, oh, well, here's another series for you, Bob. Here,
Right.
Yeah. Here, be careful not to fall off your wallet. You'll break your hip.
I think that's a misconception. You have that excitement and that hope and the possibility of getting to that place where you don't necessarily have to have the quote unquote straight job, but it's necessary to have something to take the stress off, because your stress bleeds into your auditions.
Absolutely. If you have to have something that is paying the rent and paying the bills and getting food on the table and getting gas in the car, so you can go do the auditions and go do the occasional job.
Yeah.
And some people just come into town and they hit the ground running, and God bless them.
Right.
It took me about 7 years before I felt comfortable enough doing voiceover that I could walk away from getting up at 5 o'clock in the morning to go sit at a desk from 7 to 4 at Paramount or Sony or at Warner Brothers or an independent office, slinging ink.
Yeah.
And at the time that I was finishing that, the computer programs that did music copying or music engraving, as they like to call it, were starting to come in, and they were getting better. They've gotten so much better since that time. And mind you, I stopped at the end of 1999.
Wow.
So I kept moving all the way through there as a copyist. But I have wonderful, very fond memories of doing that stuff. I worked at Joanne Kane's office at Fox. Worked on The Simpsons there on the music for the show for Alf Clausen. Alf Clausen I knew from my days at Long Beach State. I used to copy big band charts for him. When I was there, John Prince was the jazz band director, and I was learning to be a copyist, in college.
Yeah.
And every once in a while, he'd say, "Alf has a chart. Do you want to copy it?" And I'd say, "Yeah." And Alf would, I would get paid to do these jobs. And it was just one of those things that I fell into, that I had a good hand and I could, I understood what to do.
Oh, that's wonderful.
So, I mean, that was my introduction into all that stuff. But and then as I was phasing out copying, I was getting into being able to, I would get auditions over at Nickelodeon. I did a couple of Oh Yeah cartoons, and several of those Oh Yeah cartoons became series. The Fairly Odd Parents came out of that.
Oh, wow.
What was it? Chalkboard or chalk? It was.
I have an image in my head of what you're talking about, but I cannot conjure
the
up
kid
the
who
title.
drew things with, and all the drawings looked like they were done with chalk.
Oh, yeah.
And that series at Nickelodeon came out of the Oh Yeah cartoon.
What was the Oh Yeah cartoon? Was it a short, sketch?
It was a pilot.
Okay.
It was basically a pilot. They gave all the animators who wanted to, they gave them a chance, Fred Siebert was one of the producers over there, still working over there as far as I know. And Fred put up this, project where, come up with an idea, we'll animate it, we'll get you voice actors, we'll do the whole thing, and then they would run these things.
Fantastic.
And it was, a lot of things came out of it. And it was a great opportunity for me. I got to work, the first one that I did was for, and I'm going to forget his name. It'll come to me in a second. Well, the second one I did was for Alex Kerwin, and that was called Magic Trixie. And Magic Trixie was this little girl who had magical abilities, but she didn't know it, and she went to a sideshow, and I was playing Migmar the Magician. And when I auditioned for it, Alex was in the booth with Ginny McSwain, the voice and casting director, and they had a picture of Migmar, but they didn't have a description of him, really.
Okay.
They just had the picture.
Yeah.
Tall, wearing the, clawhammer coat and the white bow tie, and he had these really wild, cat-like glasses and a big top hat. And I just thought, well, he's very theatrical because he's a magician, so, big voice, we'll do this sort of thing, and I'm Migmar, blah, blah. And I didn't get 4 words out, and Ginny just pushed the talk back and said, no, everybody's doing that. Give me something else, Bob. And I said, well, Alex, can you tell me, because I was, had been introduced to Alex.
Yeah.
Can you tell me a little more about the character? And he started describing things about him. And the first image that popped in my head in first voice was John Lovitz. Because he was conniving and he was trying to steal from people and he was doing things that were, this and that. And it was just so Lovitzy.
Yeah.
And I just said, well, so you want something like this. I'm Migmar. Thank you very much. Ooh, a ball? Amazing. And Jenny just said, go with it. Do it right now. And I just went through the script and I did it as Lovitz and I got the gig.
Wow.
And that was the first time I worked with Greg Berger as well. He was
kidding.
He was a magic store owner that Trixie came in and buys a magic trick from.
Oh, that's great.
So it was a wonderful little short. I had a ball doing it. And the other one was with Vince. Oh, worked for John Cristofalusi forever and a day. Vince Waller.
Vince Waller.
God, shame on me for forgetting his name. Vince Waller. The first one I did was called Jelly's Day.
Okay.
And Jelly was a piece of toast with legs and arms, little girl with grape jelly all over the front. But Jelly was voiced by Gray Delisle Griffin, Loudermilk Duncan B. Stranger. I don't know. There's so many last names that go with that wonderful woman. But anyway, that was the first time I worked with Gray. And she was Trixie, and I was doing, or she was not Trixie, she was Jelly, and I was her Uncle Betty. And Uncle Betty, in typical Vince Waller fashion, looked very odd. He looked like a crazy uncle with a big Bob Hope type ski slope nose, but wore a kilt. And I looked at him and I thought, well, maybe he sounds a little bit like Ed Wynn because he's a little goofy. And I started doing my Ed Wynn voice. Oh, this is wonderful for everybody. Let's do this. Come on, Jelly. Let's go see if we can find those flying toupees from Mars. And Vince loved it. And that one was cast by Chris Zimmerman. They had different casting directors, different directors on every one of them. And it was great. I mean, all the guys were coming in to read for those things, and those were my 2 first things at Nickelodeon.
I love, Bob, that that some of these, that your touchstones are just for some of these pieces in particular are based off of, well, here's Lovitz, here's the thing, or my character, and trusting your gut, making a strong choice, and Ginny McSwain telling you that that's the wrong choice for her. Yeah. So going, all right, well, here's this, and
you've got to be able to have, I know guys that actually have a laminated list that they keep in their pocket. And they go through, because sometimes you just go blank as to what voices you can do. Yeah. Under the pressure of the moment. Yeah. But I can usually pull things out. Maurice LaMarche is the best example. Mo can do everybody. Right. They hired him on The Simpsons to do Harry Truman. Who does Harry Truman these days? Nobody. Just Mo. Right. But, Mo has become a really good friend of mine. I've worked with him a few times. God, all these guys that, I grew up, or not grew up, but I was in my early adulthood was watching the Animaniacs and watching Pinky and the Brain, and just, and then getting to work on the music for those shows when I worked at Warner Brothers, as a floater. Those were great. And I would occasionally get to go and be the librarian on the session. And so I get to be with Rich Stone and Steve and Julie Bernstein.
Oh, my God.
All the music people. And then all the orchestra people were people I already knew from copying at other places and being librarians. And those sessions were so much fun. God, we had a blast. Paulson would show up to them periodically.
Just to come and watch
Just
the
to
sessions?
come and watch. Tress McNeil would be there.
Yeah.
Jess would come by. I mean, sometimes they had to do singing
Sure.
as part of what they were doing that day. But they would come by and listen to the music and, listen to what the guys were doing. And they would just be in awe of what everybody does. I'm still in awe of it, and I do that stuff. But, it was a great learning experience to be able to, listen. I listen to a lot of old radio shows. I watch a lot of old classic movies.
Yeah.
And I know who Sidney Greenstreet is, and Peter Lorre, and Boris Karloff, and Bela Lugosi.
Yeah.
I mean, I started listening as a kid to Stan Freberg records. My mom had some, the best of the Stan Freberg radio shows. And I would listen to those things constantly and listen to what Freberg would do. And then later I got his autobiography, It Only Hurts When I Laugh. It's still available. Find it, read it. It's a great book. And pick up anything that he's done ever. And Freberg would do these great voices. And he got this radio show in the 50s when Jack Benny went to television. So for 13 weeks, he had a radio show. He had Billy May and a bunch of his top flight musicians as the orchestra.
Jeez.
The Judd Conlon Rhythmaires as his vocal group. And his voice cast, it was himself, Dawes Butler, June Foray, and Peter Leeds. You don't need anyone else.
You don't need anybody else.
Occasionally he would bring in Marvin Miller, the voice of Robbie the Robot.
Right.
But these guys, they all had done radio. I mean, if you have Sirius XM in your car, channel 148.
Channel 148.
With Greg Bell, those radio shows are a gold mine. You can hear Paul Frees pop up on darn near anything. Virginia Gregg, who was a staple of the Dragnet TV series and a lot of other things, she was an amazing radio actress. She showed up on, Frontier Gentlemen, on Dragnet, on radio, on, you name a series, she was there as part of it. Gunsmoke. Bill Conrad, the most unlikely physical type person to be Matt Dillon, but on radio, you believed that he was 6'4" and would, do exactly what he said.
Yeah.
And then you had Parley Bear as Chester. Parley Bear, the mayor of Mayberry. And the voice of Ernie, the Keebler elf.
Really?
Yes, that was Parley Bear. And he showed up all the time doing stuff. These great voice actors that did cartoons later had so much training in radio. It was amazing. But I listened to all that stuff. I mean, Sidney Greenstreet was one of my early impressions, and I learned to do that from a record that Paul Frees did in the early 70s called Paul Frees and the Poster People. Uh-huh. And he had all these popular songs of the day, and he would put a different character voice to it. So he had Sidney Greenstreet singing Sugar, Sugar by the Archies. Oh, sugar, sugar, honey, honey, you are my candy girl, and you've got me wanting you. Oh, my. I just can't believe the loveliness of loving you.
Oh, my
It was
God.
hysterical. He had Ed Wynn singing Up, Up, and Away. Bela Lugosi, The Games People Play Now. Boris Karloff, The Look of Love. And these beautiful arrangements with the studio orchestra behind them.
Oh, man.
Clark Gable singing By the Time I Get to Phoenix. And, Paul, that album is still out there and available. Paul Frees, if you're not catching the name, for your listeners, the voice of the ghost host in the Haunted Mansion.
Oh, yes.
The narrator for Great Moments with Mr. Lincoln. The voice of Ludwig von Drake. Boris Badenoff. Captain Peter Peachfuzz on Rocky and Bullwinkle.
Yeah.
And he was also from the inception until he passed away in 1985, from I think it was 64 to 65, he was Poppin' Fresh, the Pillsbury Doughboy.
No kidding.
Yeah. And if you go back and see the original commercials, it's just Paul in his high-pitched normal voice. They kept speeding it up.
Really?
Later.
To get the Doughboy sound?
They pitched it up above where Paul had originally had it.
Uh-huh.
But, they did that to Mel Blanc for Tweety. But they pitched him up about 10%.
Wow.
So, but, listening to old character actors to get an idea for a voice, or at least the foundation of something, it doesn't have to be a dead-on impression.
And you're, even if you're just doing an Ed Wynn-inspired thing, everybody who's doing Ed Wynn might find some of the cadence, But our differences, our Ed Wynns are going to be different. And no one's going to sit there and watch your cartoon read, especially if it's like a co-star that pops up on Fairly Odd Parents, for example.
Yeah.
Although I'm sure an Ed Wynn thing has been done there. But still, it's like everybody's going to interpret it in a different way, and it's such a great foundational thing that works.
Oh, yeah.
It's so dynamic and fun and captures or matches the spirit of what that piece is.
Yeah, and those comedians and voice actors and movie stars were trained to do these things, and they weren't trained to have their voice taken away from them. Eugene Pallette, who did dozens of movies, if not hundreds of movies, excuse me, and was a great bit player. One of my favorite movies, two of my favorite movies. He was Friar Tuck in The Adventures of Robin Hood with Errol Flynn.
Yeah.
And he's the father. He's Mr. Bullock in My Man Godfrey with William Powell.
Uh-huh.
And he has this gruff, gravelly voice that and I can't quite do him, but he's a great basis for a lot of characters. But another old character actor that I just adore and I love doing his voice is Edgar Buchanan. He was Uncle Joe on Petticoat Junction.
Oh, yeah.
Now, obviously you can tell that I'm really old because I'm referencing 60s TV series. But, doing him is incredibly easy, and it's not hard on the throat. It's, just a gravelly old guy. The other day I was down sitting at the Sadie Rest, and Mr. What's his name? Oh, the guy who runs the store. Oh, yeah, Frank Cady, who was the Sam Drucker. That's him. Yeah, I can't remember these things. Anyway, I'm screwing up my own joke.
I was going to jump in and play a counterpart character based on that, giving you bad information.
Sam Drucker comes up, and he's got this case.
Sam Sampson?
No, Sam Drucker.
Sam Drucker.
Got these big quart jars of water. I said, what you got there? He said, well, Billy Joe, Betty Joe, and Bobby Joe are still bathing in the municipal water tower, so I'm selling this cooch water for $25 a quart. I said I had to get in on that. Which, it's apocryphal, but,
But, I love what I really love that you're sharing, Bob, in terms not only in your journey from how you got into VO work and your love of all these wonderful classic things that built our comic sensibility, and it's based on. I remember when I first auditioned for Second City, they were like, "Who are your comic influences?" And it was like Bugs Bunny, Mel Blanc. His timing and Tex Avery, the way that those guys made cartoons together and apart, and Chuck Jones and the timing and editing of all that stuff was a major influence in it. And then you go, well, that's vaudeville. And you know what I mean? Like those guys and Dawes, and just building on everything that has been done. And that I heard this conversation on the Hidden Brain recently with an author whose name escapes me, who was doesn't matter. The whole thing was this premium that's been put on originality. Oh, it's got to be original for it to be any good. And it's like, well, what if it's original enough if it's filtered through my point of view, but it's also honoring what works and what's been done, and
sure.
That's original too.
Yeah. Well, and the direction that I get on copy, and I'm sure you've seen it as well, is not cartoony voices, that's real voices. Or the one that burns me so much is no voice actors, only real actors. And I still see that as much education has gone out there to people. When I see that, it's just like, okay, this person doesn't know what they're talking about, has no education, and just thinks all we do are sit around and do, silly little,
I picked squeaky voices that are silly.
Right. Everybody's doing the Shmoo and Gollum.
Exactly.
So, well, how do you deal with the cartoony voice thing? Do you just go, well, what's your approach if they tell you no cartoony voices, and then
I try and do a character voice that sounds like it would actually live in today's society. I can do Edgar Buchanan as an old, the drugstore owner or the sheriff of an old town in a video game.
Right.
And just make it sound real and not make it go too broad and just keep him real like that.
Yeah.
Or, Edwin would be hard to do because there's such a comical sense to it. It wouldn't quite work. Although he did a lot of great dramatic roles.
Yeah.
But neither here nor there. But just, picking voices that will work for that or using it as a foundation. Imitating John Rhys Davies is something that has gotten me a fair amount of work.
That's so cool, by the way.
Yeah, it was something that I just, when I saw... I think the first time I did John's voice was after I saw Victor Victoria. He's the nightclub owner where Julie Andrews' character is singing.
Yeah.
But the one that really got it going was when I saw Raiders of the Lost Ark.
Yeah.
And I walked out of the theater talking to my friends going, Indy, why does the floor move? Asps? Oh, very dangerous. You go first. Or sitting at a table and I pick up a piece of fruit and I go, bad date. And I've gotten to do, excuse me, I've gotten to do Gimli and Treebeard on a lot of the Lord of the Rings games because John isn't available. He likes to do them when he is.
Yeah. But
a lot of times he has an incredible shooting schedule that he's somewhere in the world doing something and he's not available.
People are always baffled or surprised, I find, about, in particular in voice matching, that the other actor, that the principal actor isn't available to work on the thing. And the point that I keep making to them, too, is I do a fair amount of voice matching as well, is like, look, it's a last-minute thing. They're trying to get the trailer done. It's a commitment that...
Or they're doing the airplane version and they have to take the swear words out.
Exactly. And they've got 4 hours and
those are harder to do voice matches.
My gosh.
When you're replacing a small line. One of the hardest ones I ever did, and it was just because he wasn't available. He was shooting one of the last Harry Potter movies when Richard Griffiths did bedtime stories.
Oh, yeah.
And there was this scene where they had shot it in this very boomy, echoey atrium of a hotel. And they used the live audio there, but the echo was just horrible.
Oh, wow.
And they had to replace dialogue for him. And it was one of those go in audition. No, it was an audition and then be called to work.
Yeah.
So I went in and read the stuff down at CESD and thought, I've done a pretty good job here, but I don't think it sounds enough like Richard, but I'm going to give it the shot. So I did it. And then sure enough, I got the call to go down to Sony and do it. And I was very pleased to do that.
Yeah.
To be associated with doing his voice. And there's some odd ones that you get every once in a while where they just want to replace the person outright because they've got a real thick accent from wherever, a regionalism that doesn't fit what they want.
I've had a couple guys who have done a Boston accent on set, and it's probably like a day player or somebody, and they're like, we liked it in the moment, not so much, but let's take that. Can we take just a rough and tumble guy? Can you do that? Like that kind of thing.
And it's a decision that's probably made by a producer down the line who's watched, a version of the film and said, ooh, that voice just doesn't work for me.
Yeah, my ex-husband is from Boston, and I'd really rather not be reminded.
And that's one of the nice reasons.
That's right. Or I don't believe it. I don't believe his Boston accent. He was an authentic local casting.
He's from Southie.
That's right.
He's a real Southie.
Well, man, what would you say to someone now who is, let's say someone who's listening is fairly new to voiceover and interested in pursuing this craft and being able to chase either commercial or video game? What kind of a recommendation would you make for that person?
To do any of it is take some acting classes. Number one, if you don't, just get with a community theater. If you're still in school, look into being in one of the plays that they're doing, or find a community college and take some acting classes, or a local. There's got to be a local actor somewhere. In Orlando, when I was there, James Best, who was on the
Roscoe P. Coltrane.
Exactly. James Best had an acting school.
Wow.
And he would teach acting classes. And that's where I heard him say the line, because somebody asked him about Denver Pyle, and he said, if Denver Pyle ever fell off his wallet, he'd break his hip. And they were the best of friends. He was joking about it, but
sure.
He loved Denver. Denver Pyle, there's another great character actor.
Boy.
Amazing roles and the range of stuff that he did. He wasn't always Mr. Darling on the Andy Griffith Show.
Right.
He did dignified senators and judges and, just plain town folk.
Yeah.
He was a great character actor, and we don't have a lot of that anymore.
That's right.
We really don't. It's sad.
It truly is, and I don't know. I'm doing my best to keep the character actor alive.
And I appreciate that.
Thank you very much.
As soon as I start doing your voice, you can be replaced.
That's why I keep changing it up, Bob. Oh man, yeah. Acting is so important.
Yeah, it's very important. And listen to everybody you know, because inside your mom, your grandma, your aunt, your dad, your uncle, your grandfather, the guy down at the barber shop, the guy who's, checking you out at the grocery store, the lady who's, just passing you in the aisle at the grocery store. Listen to every voice, because there's some kind of a hook that's you can just latch onto and start creating a character and just play with it. Yeah. On your ride home in the car, just start fiddling with that voice. Remember what it was and find something that you can always recall that voice from, some phrase that fits it.
That's it.
Whenever I have to get into, John Rhys Davies, it's always, Indy, why does the floor move?
That's your end.
That's where it goes.
Yeah.
And, and because of that and, having imitated him for so long, my first big gig doing John was doing him for the Indiana Jones ride at Disneyland, because when they had to update the safety spiel, John was working on Lord of the Rings. And It's very hard to go up to a snowpack and put a microphone there and have him do Sala when he's being Gimli.
Exactly.
So I was lucky enough to get hired by Walt Disney Imagineering to go do that. Man. And the really cool thing was, and Brian Nevsky, the casting director there, told me this, after the fact, that he did an A/B for the producers. He had John, because it was the same script that I was reading that they had. So they played John, and then they played me for the producers, and they went, which one is John? So, and I took that as high praise. And then when they came in, they told me, we couldn't believe how close you were.
Wow.
And I said, well, I'll try and do it again for you. And they just, I saw their jaws open when they were listening to me.
It's the greatest feeling, and such a feeling of honoring to the person. I always feel that way about, if I get to step in and mimic this person and make it believable, then in a way I've helped Vince out.
Sure.
That it's not that he doesn't have to or can't, but I'm able to.
If it needs to be done,
I'm available to help out.
And I've never had the privilege of meeting John Rhys Davies, but there was a session that I went to, and the director said, Bob, we had John in here yesterday doing a whole bunch of stuff, and we just didn't get to this. And I said, well, why isn't John here doing it today? He had to fly off to, Malta or something, wherever it was. Yeah. He's filming, and he had to leave. I said, well, I guess that's okay. And he said, but he did say as he left, why don't you get that guy who does me? So, I would love to meet John one day.
Yeah. Did you ever hear Chris Cox's story about meeting Sam Elliott?
No, that's something I should wait.
But again, I'll add that on to our pile of conversation over a couple drinks and a steak.
I will take you up on that.
Awesome. I can't wait to participate in that. Bob, how can people find you on you're very active on Twitter.
I'm trying not to be as verbose. I'm trying to make it more about the business now, as opposed to adding smart alecky remarks to everything. God, I can't help it.
You can't help yourself. But
if you want to find me on Twitter, I'm Bob Joles, BOBJOLES, VO, at Bob Joles VO.
And
not on the Facebook. Got off of there for a myriad number of reasons, but you just need to know I'm not there.
What do you got coming out? Anything you can talk about that's coming out in the near future?
I have a thing for Disney that hasn't. It's sort of been announced, but it hasn't been announced. So I can't.
So you can't really talk about.
And I just did a really cool voice thing. I did 3 voices, one fairly substantial in the thing. It's going to be a direct-to-video or DVD.
Uh-huh.
An iconic character. I can't really say who or what, because it definitely has not been announced.
Yeah.
But there's a lot of. I saw Yuri Lowenthal and I saw John DiMaggio the day I was working.
Wow.
John was before me. Yuri was after me. And it's a big character that has a long standing at through animation. But I can't say anything more than that. Otherwise, they're going to kill me.
They'll kill you.
They will kill me, and they'll kill my character off.
That's right.
Or they'll just kill my voices.
They'll just kill your voice and find someone else to do it.
Well, Bob was first. We're going to go with that
We're
second
gonna have to
choice
go
guy.
with the,
Where's that Maurice LaMarche?
Maybe we can still get John Rhys Davies. It's, I just as a sidebar, I'm surprised. I had never really stepped into that. And I did my very first video game back in Chicago when EA was still in Chicago.
Okay.
And it was like a Marvel game, and I was a voice in a crowd. They needed 17 different actors to be like, look out, it's Captain Shield, duck, that kind of stuff. And I went on IMDb one night and was like, woohoo! And I saw the game title and I put my name as crowd guy, whatever. and then was like, it's a credit. I'm going, woohoo! I got an X, and now I've got 7 instead of 6 on IMDb. And then about a month later, I got a phone call from my agent, Sharon Watrick at Voices Unlimited, and she was like, you need to call IMDb and take that credit down because Marvel is upset. And EA is upset that credit is up. I was like, I didn't credit I said, no. It's got to do something. They're unhappy.
Put it up there.
Yeah, must have been. Well, there's no way a fanboy would have known. You put it up there. And then the volume of time I spent trying to get IMDb to put it down, and it's like trying to scrape a permanent marker off of carpet.
Oh, yeah, and getting them to acknowledge things when we were doing when we did Jungle Book 2. Before the movie had come out, they had put down that Ron John's father, who was played by John Rhys Davies in the movie, I did Bagheera. Yeah. They had it down as David Ogden Stiers had done it. And he might have been announced at one point to have done it, but it made more sense for John to be doing it. Yeah. But I knew that John was doing it because they showed me the cast list. Yeah. And and the best part of those jobs were coming in and out of LA studios, and the guy who was always in front of me was Tony J. and Robert, how are you? So wonderful to see you. Excuse me, I've got to go get a drink and another cigarette right now. I hope the room isn't too fouled for you. Good to see you, Tony, as always. Bright spirits. But I tried to get that taken down, and it took a while. Yeah. But I did.
Did you really?
I did finally get it changed. And I had written a private email to their desk or whatever and said, this is who I am. This is what I'm doing. This is the official cast list, and sent that to them and said, if you have any questions, you can ask Disney. They will give you this. Okay. And it took a little bit longer than most things, but it was like 3 or 4 weeks. But it did finally come down, and the right one went up.
That's good to hear that it can be done.
Yeah.
Because that hasn't necessarily always been my experience, but it's good. Bob, I can't tell you how much I appreciate you coming on the show.
Oh, thanks, Skip. Thanks for asking me. I've had a blast.
Just a delight to have you on, and congratulations on all things and continued success. And we will talk to you soon. And to those of you who are tuning in, thanks again for joining us for All Over Voiceover. We'll be back soon. Peace. Thank you for joining us on All Over Voiceover with Kif VH. Please take a moment to review the show and let other folks know what you thought. And if you dug it, please subscribe. Follow the show on Twitter at AllOverVO and check out our Facebook page at facebook.com/AllOverVO with Kif VH. That's it for this time. You get what you get and don't get upset. Claim victory and depart the field.